Jump right in, man.
Go. Test. Cool. Hey everyone, I'm Eric Stone from Mudhouse Coffee Roasters. I'm just going to take you through my roasting process for the compulsory round coffee here. All right, so first things first, I started out with a green bean inspection. I was looking for any potential green bean defects. I thought it was a relatively clean coffee overall. I did find some light insect damage as well as some broken and chipped beans, so I did my best to sort those out by hand before roasting. After that, I moved on to screen size. While I didn't have a set of screens available to me, I did my best using my eyesight to sort it by size. I thought it was relatively uniform in size. I did notice a handful of outliers, though, primarily some really small pea berries as well as some larger beans. I picked those out as well as best I could. I didn't want the small beans to overdevelop and the larger beans to underdevelop given the same batch size or roast batch. I then confirmed the moisture content at 10.5%, and that checked out fine. I then did the free settle density method and found that this was a relatively dense coffee at 0.71 grams per milliliter, which was very informative moving on to the next stage of my roast plan. So since this was a dense coffee, I know I wanted to use a lot of energy in the roast. I call it like a high energy roast. I roasted this in my San Franciscan 1-pound roaster, using a batch sizes of 275 grams. That's about 60% of the roaster's capacity. That batch size really allows for ample convection during the roast. Because this was a wash process, I knew I could use a lot of convection in the roast and not have to worry about necessarily burning off any of the sugars on the outside of the coffee like you might if it were a naturally processed coffee. So moving on, like I said, I used a high energy roast. I started my roast at 415 degrees. The theory here is that I just really needed to start penetrating that dense cell structure of the bean right from the get-go. I found that if I went too lower, I was running into just underdeveloped characteristics. I wasn't going to be able to thoroughly develop the coffee. If I went much higher than the 415, then I ran into issues with scorching and burning the coffee. So 415 seemed about perfect. Right after we bottomed out at a turning point about 1 minute and 45 seconds, you can see on my environmental curve here, I really blasted it with a lot more energy. Here we're just really trying to jumpstart those Maillard reactions, really start to sweeten up the coffee as we climb really fast to an early first crack time at 7 minutes and 13 seconds. Here, with that early first crack time, I'm trying to really preserve and reveal as much of the inherent acidity of the coffee as possible. I found that earlier first crack times were just a little bit too sour, and then later first crack times we just lost out on a lot of the vibrancy of the acidity in the coffee. So 7 minutes, 13 seconds was perfect. After that, I have a relatively long, given the short 10-minute roast time of this coffee, roast development time of 2 minutes and 44 seconds, about 27.5% of roast development ratio. Here, I'm just really trying to get caramelization and some sugar rounding at the end to really sweeten up this coffee. I also needed to tame some of that acidity that we had revealed with the early first crack time. So just lengthening it out, trying to keep that acidity nice and bright and the coffee sweet. I had an end temperature of 386 degrees. Much higher than that, the coffee started to dry out. Much later end time, the coffee also was getting drier, and then we were just getting into more of those roastier characteristics that I'm trying to avoid. I ended up with 5 batches. These were 275 gram batches to start, 12.8 moisture percent lost, for an average of 239.7 grams batches is what I ended up with. I sorted for Quakers and any other potential defects at the end. And what I got out of this coffee, and what I hope you all experienced too, was a fragrance of chocolate, cherry, and raisin. An aroma, if I can get my sheet here, of golden raisin, cherry, and bread. Flavor of stone fruits, cooling to pear, further to peach, then finally brown sugar. The aftertaste was slightly drying, but with grapefruit. The acidity was medium malic acidity, cooling to citric acidity. It was a medium bodied with a mouthfeel of dry wine. The sweetness was in between candy and chocolate. I describe it as a brown sugar type of sweetness. And overall, I thought it was a well-balanced cup. And time.